I think we just want people to remember that, their small decisions can have a massive impact, and that their barista that's handing them their coffee is as close to them as the farmer who's picked it off the coffee tree, and that there's no separation in how intimate those relationships are. It's just that it's happening thousands of kilometres away in another country that you've probably never been to and probably never will.
There are so many ways we could start talking about Commonfolk, the business by Sam Keck. But Sam, I want to start by saying the word Rolex. Let's just jump in there. Welcome to Dirty Linen, and let's get going.
Thank you. Great to be here, and happy to talk about Rolexes. They're very important to us at Commonfolk.
Tell me more.
So I'm not talking about the exclusive watch brand that I assume it's Swiss, because I think they're the ones who make all the great watches. I'm actually talking about what was a mistranslation of a classic Ugandan breakfast. And so I found out about the Rolex on my first trip to Uganda back in 2015, and realised that not only was it delicious, but it had nothing to do with a watch. It was actually rolled eggs. So it's basically an omelette wrapped up in a fresh chapati. And I think someone had been listening to the street vendors selling them in the morning, because it's the go-to breakfast, calling out, come get your Rolex. They thought they were saying Rolex, but I was saying rolled eggs. And so we've got them on the menu at our venues now, in honour of our partnerships with Ugandan coffee farmers, because that's what you'd be eating if you're a Ugandan coffee farmer heading up into the hills to do a day of hard picking.
Love that. So tell me why it's important to you that you do, I suppose, open up this connection between people drinking their coffee in Melbourne or the Mornington Peninsula and coffee farmers in places, very far away, places that don't enter the consciousness of most people in Australia, I would hazard to say.
Well, you almost nailed it. It's because, these farmers, from our perspective, as coffee roasters and then coffee brewers, are the lifeblood of our business, and they are our closest sort of allies, colleagues, and friends. But it's missed in the equation a lot of the time, with the exception of maybe a pretty photo, to sell a bag of their coffee on a website. But Actually, the reality of it is that their life is, far more complex and I guess almost like brutally, difficult than a couple of snapshots. And so we kind of wanted to be able to bridge that gap and introduce some of what they actually do with, and then the way they actually live with, pardon me, with their story, and so enjoying the same breakfast that they might enjoy before they head out to work was just part of that, and it's a way for us to introduce the idea that these are real people with a real culture and real habits, and real needs, and that's just one part in that, and because we work with them year in, year out, we want to make sure that our customers and the people who choose to kind of work with Commonfolk get to learn a little bit about their journey and their story in the process.
So, Sam, let's step back a bit from that delicious rolled egg breakfast. Tell us the Commonfolk story. How did you get started?
Like most people who work in coffee, I started off by getting my degree in marine zoology at Melbourne Uni.
Perfect.
But funnily enough, that was almost key to me getting into coffee, because while I was at university, I was working as a barista to kind of pay my way, and be able to buy beer. And just opposite Melbourne Uni is a fantastic little roastery called Seven Seeds. Don't know if you've heard of it. Led by the Mark Dundon and Bridget Moore, and they're incredibly inspiring people. I think they do a lot of the same things that we try and do. And I just sitting there doing my homework, tapping away, writing my scientific papers on my laptop whilst enjoying, delicious, ethically sourced specialty coffee, and realised that my baristaing that I was doing back at a cafe down on the Mornington Peninsula, could be so much more than what it was. And so I kind of got obsessed with specialty coffee, and the provenance of the product, and where you source coffee from, and how each different country and origin and farming process, influences the flavour. And so I approached it very much from a perspective of being a foodie and wanting to understand how I could control and get the results in the cup that I wanted. And I soon, learned more and more about the actual ethics of coffee trading and how the entire system is kind of rigged against, the most vulnerable people at either end of the value chain. And so decided I'd work full-time in hospitality once I finished my bachelor's rather than going straight into doing a master's or a PhD to see if I could hack hospitality full-time. Absolutely loved it, and was lucky enough to find a couple of people who shared my passion, who were like, well, why don't we do our own thing? Why don't we set up a coffee roastery and a cafe? And so one thing led to another, and we found a big shed in the industrial estate of Mornington, and inspired, I guess, by the guys at Mornington Brewery, now called Tar Barrel Brewery, who'd done it just before us, a couple of years before us. We figured, you know what, it worked for them, worked for beer, why can't it work for coffee? And by the time we'd signed the lease, it was too late. We kind of had to sort the fit out and get the council permits and open the doors. And I think from day one, we were kind of blown away with the amount of people who were prepared to drag themselves out into essentially the middle of nowhere to have a cup of coffee just because it was roasted and brewed a little bit differently to what they expected. And we've grown from there to, 10 years later in January next year with, I guess an established coffee importing and roasting business with like dozens and dozens of supporting venues as well as our own.
Yeah, wow. Amazing potted history, Sam. And I love the zoology angle. You obviously had that example of Seven Seeds ethically sourcing their coffee. What was it like stepping onto that journey yourself? Like, what were the challenges?
I think the coffee industry, and I think a lot of people who work in specialty coffee in Melbourne know this, and it's a bit of a dirty secret. I don't think it's so much of a secret anymore, is that, all the little small roasters always say, oh, we're doing direct trade, whatever the hell that means. And we're doing all this like kind of work with our farmers, and they're just they're just lying. They're not doing any of that. They're just buying from the same importers everyone else buys from, which is weird because there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. There's a lot of really good importers who are actually doing the heavy lifting in making sure that farmers are paid a fair and equitable price for their product, although there can always be more work done in that space. But I thought that it was going to be really easy to just I guess call up a coffee farmer and arrange to buy some of their coffee. But it's actually really difficult. The process of exporting coffee and importing it into another country, it takes a lot of skill that most little small business owners and coffee roasters probably don't have. And so that was the first hurdle. And initially we just bought a few bags of coffee from some great importers. So, Melbourne Coffee Merchants was one, I think Cafe Imports, First Crop Coffee, great little importers who are trying to do good stuff at origin, and were challenged that we weren't really direct trading. We knew who the farmers were, but we didn't have a relationship with them. And that was kind of counter to what we wanted to do. The whole point was that we were going to be bringing in coffee ourselves. But, we didn't even know how much coffee we'd go through. So as we built the business up, we had a real focus on trying to create and conjure genuine partnerships with farms that we would then buy from regularly, because that's how most of our other suppliers would work. If we had a supplier we wanted to celebrate, they were our supplier, sort of 365 days a year, or at least whenever their product was available. It was weird to us that a lot of coffee roasters were kind of just chopping and changing and buying whatever coffee was available spot in country, or just, buying whatever coffee tasted the best on the cupping table. It just seemed like a bizarre way to move the industry forward, because if you're a farmer, if you're in agriculture, and this is probably the same for Australian farmers just as much as it would be coffee farmers in developing countries, you're kind of looking for consistency of sale. You want customers that are going to buy your coffee and who are agreeing to buy your coffee before you've produced it, so that there's less risk in you putting in the effort. And so we realized that that's what we needed to do. And from day one, I guess it was a series of steps towards doing that more and more. So it took us many, many years to be able to do it in a way that we were really proud of and feel that we were actually having an impact and helping. It started actually with some help from Marcelo at Minnesota, who connected us with Gabrielle and Flavia Oliveira, who run the Bomb Jesus Cafe Laboretta estate. And it's a much bigger business than a lot of the smallholder farmers we enjoy working with now as well. But they actually visited us, our humble little coffee roastery, the first year we'd opened. We'd probably only roasted a handful of bags of their coffee. But that was our first direct partnership that we decided to work with every single year. And they have been, I guess it's been a great exercise in learning how to do that, because they were an established business that made it a lot easier, and Marcelo and his team made it really, really, really simple. And so it kind of inspired us to do the same. And so now we source over 85% of all of the coffee we roast from direct partners, which include our Ugandan partners, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a second because they're something really special, and then partners in Colombia as well that include the ex-world barista champion Diego Campos, who was just handed his crown over to Anthony Douglas, Melbourne boy, which is great. And we actually partnered with him for his first harvest of a farm that he started just before he actually won the WBC. So there's some really great people we get involved in, but the challenges were very much learning how to bring coffee in ourselves and do it in an economical way that matched, I guess, our values and how we wanted to work with farmers and producers.
So interesting because, as you talk about that chopping and changing, it does make me think about the way a lot of cafes and restaurants like to source produce. It's about these long-term relationships with, the lettuce farmer or the pig farmer, the cheese maker. But it does seem that there is a different kind of approach with coffee. And naturally it's, well, maybe not naturally, but I suppose it does have to do with the abstract nature of most of those relationships, where it is a relationship through the actual bean and not so much, most people don't have those relationships with the actual people who are producing them. But I think once you personalise it, then naturally you want to continue those human relationships.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's really hard to conjure up those relationships because it's really hard to talk to someone in a language that you don't speak, with a language that they don't speak, from a totally different culture on the other side of the world, whose sometimes contact details have been obscured or not made really clear by the people who stand to, I guess, control the value of the product they're producing. So a lot of importers aren't going to encourage you to reach out to the farmers, and I think that's changing. But then again, a lot of small business owners, a lot of coffee roasters aren't even interested. If they can get the story via their importer, in a way that they think their customers will respond to, whether that be a couple of photos and some discussion around the elevation and the climate and the, and the location of the farm, and maybe, like a two sentence, kind of expose of who the farmer is and what their name is, then that's enough. But that actually means nothing. It's just a product. It's not actually necessarily doing good. It's not necessarily doing bad, but it's not really creating, I guess a crop to cup or a farm to table value chain. And there's just no way of knowing, whether or not it's a good thing that you're participating in. And from what I've seen, and I've visited many, many coffee origins and coffee farms, is that it's not always a good thing. And in fact, the coffee industry is almost, set up, as an exploitative industry. And the fact that most coffee is sold as a commodity means that it's going to be very hard to change that. And we're not thinking that we can change everything at all. Like, we're still a really, really small player, even in just like the small roaster scene, let alone all of coffee. So we'll rather want to just maybe be, maybe a little example of what you can do if you're prepared to work a little bit harder. But then also, I think this is sort of a recent thing with just the way that we've seen Melbourne, always champion itself as being like a beacon of specialty coffee and the best coffee city in the world. And we're just full of shit. Like, that's not true at all. Most roasters are just buying spot coffee, and they're just asking, and I know this because I talk to our importing friends, they're like always asking, what's the cheapest coffee you've got? What can I chuck in my blend? And also, can I buy one bag of this really expensive geisha so that I can sell that and market that and make it seem like we're really freaking awesome, when actually we're just trying to race to the bottom and become the next giant commercial roaster that gets bought out by a beer company or something like that. And like, again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's only something wrong with it when you're lying about that being your intention. And I think that's frustrating because it's very hard to get cut through when people are spending more on their marketing budgets than their coffee budgets.
So it is really hard to change the massive international coffee industry where it's traded as a commodity on futures exchange. It's huge. So what does Commonfolk do in its own small way to, with direct action to create change?
That's a really good question. I think we try and do a few things rather than a lot of things, just better. And so we kind of got this mentality, we often talk about it, of being smaller to be bigger, in the sense that, like, we know we're not going to be the biggest roastery in Australia, but when we do stuff, let's do it really well and let's be really clear about how we do it. So there's sort of two components to that. One is our philosophy of how we operate as a business. We're kind of, we filter all our decisions through our values and our vision. Our values being, for quality, for people, and to be pioneering. And you can kind of unpack those in whatever way you like. But that kind of gives us a direction of what we need to do. And so if we find a really great coffee, but it's actually, bad for people, we're probably not going to buy it. If we find really great people to work with, but they have terrible coffee, we're probably not going to do it either. And the pioneering aspect very much is around making sure that we're leaders and maybe an example in whatever way we can be, but also being humble, because the reality is there are so many other people doing great things as well. And we kind of want to collaborate with and draw on ideas that already exist that help us be better. So the idea of being like for profit, but profit being, financial, social and environmental is not new, and there's so many businesses doing it. So we'll look at what they do and try and do those things too. And that materializes into our partnerships model of buying coffee, where I already said, so 85% of our coffee is sourced from people that we buy from every harvest. And we try and find some shared risk there in terms of what they need us to pay and what we can pay. And, it's always a fun experience to try and work through that. And it's actually, recently as coffee prices have skyrocketed, it's actually helped give us some stability in price, because our farmers typically aren't using the C price or, the price of coffee as a reference. Instead, they're using what they need to sustain themselves and to reinvest into their businesses, their price setting model, and that helps. But then also we've set up an initiative from day one that we call The Cup That Counts, which is essentially about helping make our industry fairer for the most vulnerable people involved. So for us, that's, the coffee farmers and the pickers and the workers in smallholder operations, and then maybe the hospitality workers, the young, vulnerable hospo workers at our end, who may be working in cafes and restaurants who work with our coffee, but really are, open to exploitation in their own way. And so we were giving 20 cents from every coffee we've ever made to that project, and then reinvesting it into different projects. So I think to date we've raised almost 300 grand for that. And that's gone a long way to help set up in Uganda a coffee producer called Zakukabora Coffee, which we've worked with in a commercial perspective every harvest they produced as well. So obviously there's a philanthropic donation portion of it, but also, a commercial reality where we'll buy their coffee for a price that works for them. And then probably a little bit closer to home, in a state nearby, Commonfolk, that has a bit of government housing and a lot of, vulnerable at-risk youth. We've helped sponsor and fund Homeground Cafe, which is a vocational training cafe for hospitality workers. We've got such a massive issue in our city at the moment with there being so many, I think hundreds of thousands of vacant hospitality jobs. We figured in our own little way we could help bridge youth unemployment, but also hospitality, staff shortages, by creating a great space for people who might otherwise not have had a go, a little bit of training. And so Commonfolk provides all the coffee for that, and then also all of the training. And I'm sitting on the board at the moment as a director with some other incredible local people who work in community development. So and again, it sounds like we're doing a lot, but those things are actually almost inherently part of our business anyway. Like, there should be some onus on a coffee roastery cafe to train the next generation of staff, in my opinion. And there definitely should be an onus on a coffee roastery to make sure that they're reinvesting back into those producing the coffee that they claim to love so much. And so that kind of ticks both those boxes. And yeah, it is a cost to our business. But I think that it's one that we built into how we operate structurally from the very beginning. And so we almost do it without thinking about it. And yeah, I guess we're really proud. Our team are constantly talking about how proud they are to work for Commonfolk, because that's the structure that we operate to. And they so all of the tips, if you've ever tipped, at one of our cafes, they donate that. And this was their decision too, very early on, not mine, to give their tips actually to the cup accounts as well, which was, I thought, incredibly generous.
It's a pretty amazing culture that you're creating, Sam, by the sounds of it. And just to put people in the picture, you've got the 4 locations. You've got Mornington, where the roastery is, cafes in Frankston, Beaumaris and South Yarra. I mean, what does it feel like to come into one of your businesses? What are you trying to create for community, for the public that come to dine and drink with you?
Look, we call ourselves, we call anyone who's part of our community like a foker. It's a bit of a play on our name. It was very much around making great coffee accessible to everybody. I mean, anyone who drinks coffee would know that you go to like a big corporate kind of generic brand to get a coffee, and it's going to cost pretty much the same as going to get a coffee from a great specialty cafe, like small business. And so it's actually, weirdly, it's sort of an accessible luxury product in many ways. And yes, there are obviously beans and single origins and that kind of thing that cost a lot more. But if you want to go and get a latte from Commonfolk, it's going to cost you about the same as getting one from McDonald's, which we're kind of proud of, but also maybe that needs to change too. But so we want to welcome people in with humility and rather than kind of hit them in the face with how amazing we are and all the cool stuff we do and, these really sophisticated and difficult to approach coffees that we offer. We want to meet them where they're at and give them the coffee that they want, make it the best bloody coffee they've ever had, and then befriend them and learn who they are and learn how they fit into the community and why they're coming into one of our venues. And once we've built a relationship, maybe take them on a journey, if they're interested in going on it, towards understanding where their coffee comes from and why maybe choosing to drink this coffee is a good idea compared to choosing to drink another one. And so, yeah, you're going to be welcomed in. You're going to feel hopefully relaxed. We're not pretentious. Our spaces we've built ourselves. We haven't gone into a lot of debt. We don't have, multi-million-dollar budgets for our fit outs. And so we see them as being humble spaces that are approachable, but still engaging, like we've partnered with some incredible local artists, who've kind of created a whole heap of sort of illustrations that match our personality. Our coffee labels and the names we give some of our micro lots are like designed to maybe pique your interest and to be to make you ask questions. They're not your typical, we named this after the farmer every single time. And so hopefully you'll come in and feel inspired to ask questions and to dig a little bit deeper about your coffee and where it comes from. But at the same time, if you just want to come in and have a traditional cafe experience, get your takeaway coffee or sit down and have good brekkie, you can do that too. They're the sort of spaces. And I think it's the team that really make that happen. It's our people and the fact that they buy into our values. So, hopefully you're going to have a quality, people-focused and pioneering experience.
Love it. So, I mean, we might as well ask some huge questions. So what do you, how someone comes in and they perhaps have this engaging experience, whether it's like, what's a Rolex, or why did you call this roast that? What do you mean this 20 cents goes where? Like what else might happen to a person that starts to consider those things? Like how in your, when you think about the big goals that you might have, like how do you want to make the world better in other ways?
It's a big question. I think I was talking to Tommy Turlock, who's our head of production, in charge of all the roasting and cold brew and everything like that yesterday, around why we bother doing all this stuff. And and he said what I think a lot of purpose-led businesses, kind of stand by anyway, which was, well, we'd be doing it. We'd want to do it anyway, even if we didn't talk about it or even if no one knew about it, because it's kind of who we are. And so I think that we want to remind people and our customers that you can choose to make small decisions like drinking a Commonfolk coffee instead of, insert whatever other coffee you might be drinking, and have a direct impact. And so we really want to celebrate, people who choose to give us a go for the impact that they're having, because and remind them that, again, it's that smaller to be bigger mentality, that a small decision is having a big impact, especially if they make it over and over again, and that they're actually part of this story. Like the coffee farmer, we actually welcomed Dave Bishop, who is the volunteer project manager leading up the Kookaburra project in Uganda. Him and his family moved there from the UK and have been there for almost 10 years now, volunteering their time to try and build this up to now what is a viable Ugandan-owned social enterprise. And we had a night at Commonfolk where people got to ask questions, and they were just unpacking, I guess, all of their thoughts around what they'd heard for, the 10 years we've been open, asking this person who they'd, I guess, only seen in photos or read in blogs about the impact that it's having. And I think people were blown away with the fact that without them, none of it would exist. Like Commonfolk can't send money over that we haven't made. And I think we just want people to remember that, their small decisions can have a massive impact, and that their barista that's handing them their coffee is as close to them as the farmer who's picked it off the coffee tree, and that there's no separation in how intimate those relationships are. It's just that it's happening thousands of kilometres away in another country that you've probably never been to and probably never will. And so hopefully it's just reminding people of the human connection in all of this. One thing Dave said that really stuck out to me, because I think that over my journey, I've moved from being, a for the coffee person, like someone who's interested in coffee quality and articulating, like sensory experience and wanting the best possible coffees, to move towards wanting the best possible humans, and the best for our humans in the process, and knowing that actually good coffee is a result of good relationships, because all of our partners that we've worked with have improved their quality over the years, even though it's been a human first approach. And I think it's probably similar in a lot of other, sourcing models, even ones in Australia, where if you focus on the people behind the product, and they have their needs met, they're probably going to have more energy, resources, time, and passion to invest back into making the products that we enjoy drinking and eating better. And so I think that that's it. If our customers and the people who want to get involved, if I could pass anything on to them, it would be that they are involved, and that they're important, and that these products that they're choosing to support are only going to get better if they stay involved and more connected. And I've seen people who were customers who now work for us. And I remember at the start, I was always nervous about that, because, it's that kind of imposter syndrome. You don't want these people who kind of maybe put your business on a bit of a pedestal to come in and realize that you're a bunch of hacks just, blindly walking through and trying to navigate the hospitality and food manufacturing industry. But the reality is that's all of us. And so we've got people who've come outside of the coffee industry to work with us within the coffee industry, just because they've felt that connection and shared those values. And I think that's testament to what we're doing, because, hospitality, as you would know, is not an easy thing to do. And so if we've managed to, convince some suckers to come and join us on this journey, and they're still sticking around, then that's probably a nice thing. And then the other flip side to that is, if you don't want to get involved, by actually working with us, stay connected by supporting us, and then telling the story. So we'll have people who share the story of the Cup that Counts, and I guess the Kookaburra and the other partnerships we work with all over the country now. We've got like partners in Korea and in Hong Kong and Singapore, in the States, obviously in Uganda, who are kind of talking about the work that's been done and choosing to buy those coffees that I didn't even realize we knew, who they just kind of been picked up along the way. And were inspired by the story and are now kind of championing it themselves. on the other side of the world. So I think that's probably a good outcome, because the more hands on deck, the better, because we definitely can't do that much ourselves.
Well, I suppose it also makes me think, you never know where the ripples are, how far the ripples are going to extend, or who else is going to start, making a splash about what you do. But you got to start somewhere, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, love it, Sam. So when I come down to Commonfolk, maybe the new Beaumaris location, what do you reckon, what sort of coffee do you reckon I should have?
It's a great question. So we run a nice kind of like selection of coffees. There'll always be 3 different coffees on as espresso. So the house blend we're running for all the milk coffees is our Progress Street blend, named after the street we started our headquarters on in Mornington. And it's going to be showcasing, I think, at the moment, one of Diego Campos's incredible coffees, La Familia, which is his kind of collaboration with his parents-in-law. And it will be blended with some of our washed Zakuka Bora coffee. So that's our Ugandan partnership. And then also, I think at the moment, and it may have just changed actually, so the roastery guys are going to maybe listen to this and be like, Sammy, what are you talking about? But maybe a Nicaraguan coffee sourced from Caravella, which is making up a small component of that. So that's always good. If you're going to have a flat white or a latte, I say start at Progress Street, because it's a great coffee. But if you want to try something uniquely Commonfolk, you could dive into either our single origin coffee, which will probably be sourced from one of Zakuka Bora or Diego Campos's micro lots at the moment. We're about to welcome in some of Alias Rojas, which is Diego's father-in-law's micro lots. They should be arriving in the next couple of weeks. Some very, very exciting coffees there, which we can't wait to get our hands on. Or you could try our seasonal blend, which is very relevant at the moment. It's called Goosebumps, and it's kind of Halloween themed. And it's actually just 2 of our Ugandan coffees blended, so a washed and a natural. It's good fun, goes well with milk, but also without. Or grab a bottomless batch brew of any of the single origins we think hold up well for filter, and then just keep refilling your cup until you've got your buzz on. That'd be my suggestions, but also just chat to the baristas, chat to Lily, chat to Lauren, Casey, any of the crew that are working, and just ask them what's tasting good, because, coffee is, as you would know, an agricultural product, and even once it's roasted, every day brings its different challenges, and a cup that tasted great a week earlier might, taste not quite the same as you'd expect this week. And so it's good to get a little bit of insight into that, and drink what the baristas are drinking.
Wow, Sam. Well, thank you so much for making us all focus today with this chat. It's really awesome to learn more about Commonfolk and, all the great things that you do. Really appreciate you sharing with the Dirty Linen crowd today.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for listening to my rants. And hopefully we can just keep drinking good coffee that's doing good work as well. And look, we're not the only company doing incredible things. But if you just dig a little bit deeper, you can really find out ways to make a big impact by making small decisions like where to drink your coffee. So get out there and enjoy finding some gems. It's a great place to be.
Yeah, I love it, Sam. Thanks so much.
Cheers, Dani. Thank you.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinenat deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.